Well, at the risk of sounding extremely shallow, I must admit I find today to be one of the best days of the year. Today, September 10th, 2009. Why? The answer is really very simple. Today is opening day of 2009 NFL season. Football is finally back. It's been 7 months, 220 long days since Super Bowl 43 between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Arizona Cardinals. And I've all but gone stir crazy waiting for today to arrive. Now, admittedly, I'm a bit of a fanatic. And it's not that I have any special affinity for the two teams that are playing in tonight's contest, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Tennessee Titans. The reality is, I'm a bit of a degenerate. I like to bet on sports. And I've pretty much developed an addiction to fantasy football. Now, as far as gambling goes, there's some sort of sporting event that's going on just about every day of the year. But I really only bet on football and college basketball. My online wagers, though, place me among the estimated 12 million people worldwide who bet an estimated $48 billion annually, and that's online only. It doesn't include Vegas casinos. Professional sports in particular has had a long and sordid love-hate relationship with sports wagering. Officially and publicly, all of the major sports leagues are adamantly opposed to sports betting, regularly standing in opposition of any effort to expand legal sports wagering in the United States beyond the state of Nevada, and constantly supporting efforts to eliminate online sports betting and access to offshore betting parlors. I say official and public opposition because sports leagues continue to cater to the same newspapers that weekly publish the betting line. And all of the sports leagues produce injury reports. For what other reason than to give those with a rooting interest an idea of the competitive nature. Now, while gambling may be a bit risque for most, fantasy sports has become mainstream. And fantasy football is the biggest thing going. For the uninitiated, in fantasy football, team owners select or draft a team of players made up of active players in the NFL. Their squad will match up against another squad in their league. And the points are determined by calculating the points that that player will earn, scoring a touchdown, running yards, kicking field goals, and what have you. So, for instance, say I drafted Tony Romo, which I would never do, but he's a Dallas Cowboy, and say he had a 300-yard passing game and passed for 2 touchdowns. Well, the league would say, for instance, you get 3 points per touchdown, and you get maybe 10 yards a point for every 10 yards that you pass. And so Tony Romo might end up with 9 points, or something along those lines. And you would add up all the points from the players on your team, and then you compare against the other team that you were playing in your league. And once you did that, you get one of those, boom, John Madden. That's your total score. And then after 14 weeks of fantasy football and then 2 weeks of the playoffs, what you want to do is be the last man standing on your team, in your league, and win your league Super Bowl. And what's happened is, in the past, that just offered bragging rights. Today, it would likely earn you a sizable pot. Because reportedly, fantasy football, which originated back in 1962, was invented by 5 guys, including a man by the name of Bill Wankenbach, and he was one of the former owners of the Oakland Raiders, and also 4 sports writers from the Oakland Tribune. They had the first documented fantasy football league, the Greater Oakland Professional Pigskin Prognosticators League. And since then, back in 1962, fantasy football has gained steam. And it really exploded back in the late 90s with the advent of the internet and online statistical calculations and what have you. Because back in 1983, for instance, when I joined my first, 1993, when I joined my first league, we had to go to the newspapers on Monday morning to check out all of the yards rushed and the passes catched. But today, according to ESPN radio host Colin Cowherd, there are 27 million people playing fantasy football. And on average, a fantasy football player spends about 9 hours a week working on his teams. Now I have 3 teams going at any given time. And there are many critics and the traditionalists, they complain that fantasy football is ruining the sport. Because folks root for players, regardless of their team affiliation, and they don't, that the home team loyalty is gone. Proponents, on the other hand, will say that viewership has exploded as a result of fantasy football coupled with the satellite television in multiple venues. What I say, look at the NFL. They recognize. They just entered a 5-year, $600 million pact with Sprint, in part because their subscribers can now follow their teams on their cell phones. So I don't care what anybody says. Summer is over, and today is the best day of the year because football is back. Are you ready for some football?
Jerome Moore's speech was near and dear to my heart. That was probably the best thing you could have done when you have an evaluator who, just like you, loves NFL, loves fantasy football. But I think you brought everybody in to your speech with your commanding voice. It's one of your natural talents, and your posture is actually inspiring because that's actually one of my problems. And I think that your movements with your hands are very strong. So, fantastic job with that. And that's just your natural ability. But even more impressive is the way you formulated your speech. Your goals were to research a topic, and it was very obvious he researched it. Maybe a lot of the research came from what he already knew about fantasy football, but obviously the effort was there. You provided examples, fantasy football, and how it was scored. A lot of people didn't know that, but now you've explained the scoring system. You even mentioned a local player, even though you don't like that player, just to get your audience interested. So thank you for that. It's very smart. And then he went into the details, things that I didn't even know. 27 million fantasy football players? Wow. And 9 hours a week spent on this? Don't tell my wife. I'm going to have to do a little intro reflection or look at this. But the origins from the 60s, that 5 guys got together and formed this, those are impressive stats. So thank you for the research. I wouldn't have mentioned the negative aspects of your life in fantasy football. Calling yourself a degenerate, it's not really a positive thing, and we would like you from the moment you're up here. So next time I would suggest not using such strong words, maybe about something. It was sort of a joke. It didn't really go over well though, so I think maybe the wording might be strong. And the only other limitation in your speech was the usage of notes. When you have that strong presence and you look at people and you're talking to them deeply, as you do so well, it gets lost if you have to use your notes. So next time I would suggest practicing beforehand, maybe even looking at the Toastmasters International magazines. They always have tips about how to memorize your speech. The most amazing thing you do, though, is you are a trustworthy guy. We trusted everything he said because he showed both sides of the views. He mentions the pros and the opposition view of fantasy football, how effective and fun it is, and then also how it can be a danger to maybe their time spent and lost. So everyone trusts you for that, and that's fantastic. Keep up the speeches with great details. Work on the reduction of note usage, and then keep using that strength of the people, how people trust you with what you say, and you're going to do a fantastic job. Thank you, Jerome.